welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by a fantastic comics creator. I've been following his work for such a long time, and I am so excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book today, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan North, and I'm here with Star Trek Lower Decks SHAXS' Best and Worst Day, which is a mouthful of a title, but it's a good book. I think I wrote it unbiased. But
It is a good book. I really enjoyed it as both a fan of your work and of Star Trek, of Lower Decks in particular. This is a huge question, but I would love if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about your journey as a comics creator and what brought you to working within the Star Trek universe.
My strange secret origin. Right. So I came to comics, like most of us, as a fan. I was always abstractly interested in the medium, but I grew up in a small village called Osgood. There was no comic book store at that time. The internet wasn't really a thing. And I remember with my first paycheck, I graduated high school, got a job, and with my very first paycheck, I went into the comic book store in the big city of Ottawa, and I grabbed 3 books at random, just off the shelf. And 2 of those 3 books were great. And I thought, wow, if I walk into a bookstore and grab 3 books at random, I don't think I would love 2/3. That's a great average. So I just kept buying more comics to give myself an education in comics that way. And in undergrad, my last year of undergrad, I wanted to write one. I started my webcomic called Dinosaur Comics, which is the same pictures and different words, better than it sounds, and get that evolved through grad school. And then by the time I graduated grad school, I faced this choice between getting a real job and becoming a full-time cartoonist. And to do that, all I had to do was fail to get a real job, which is really easy to do. So I kept up Dinosaur Comics, still do, 3 times a week. And eventually, one of my readers graduated school and got a job at a comic book company at Boom Studios. They hired me to write Adventure Time comics. And that led to writing comics like Squirrel Girl for Marvel and now Fantastic Four. And somewhere there, I guess enough people had read my comics and I had made enough statements about how I like Star Trek at some point that when there was a Lower Decks comic desired, they'd licensed it. They wanted someone to write it. And I was asked if I was interested, and the answer was yes, of course. I love Star Trek, especially Lower Decks, where it felt like here's Star Trek with a comedic lens. And, if you were designing a iteration of Star Trek in a lab to appeal to me, that was what you would do. So it felt very much at home in that universe.
It's such a fun universe, and it works so well with your voice. I have been reading your work since Dinosaur Comics to this day, and I read some of your Adventure Time comics as well. And something that really impresses me is that it's always unmistakably you. It's a voice very like yours in the Dinosaur Comics, but you also blend really well into the universe or property that you're writing for. How do you maintain that balance?
Good question. It's tricky. I think the only shortcut or cheat code I know is to be a fan of what you're writing. When you're not writing your own stuff, like Dinosaur Comics. I guess I am a fan of Dinosaur Comics as a guy who writes it, but I could very easily slide into Adventure Time voice or Star Trek voice because I love those shows. And I felt like I understood them and had an idea of what it felt like to read it. So it gets me there and how to write it. If I was going completely cold, like, I don't know, a show I'd never seen an episode of, I'm not the person to make a comic based on that show because I'm not going to get it right. You can always tell. You can always tell when you have the details right. Although it's funny with Star Trek in particular, because I have seen all the Star Treks. And I felt like I'm now fully prepared to write a Star Trek. And then when it came to that, it was actually really, really hard because every idea I had, I knew like, oh, I can't do this idea because something that Spock said in 1967. I can't do this idea because something that Geordi said in 1992. And I kept hitting these walls of impossibility. And I realized you can't actually know too much about something. If you've seen 800 hours of Star Trek, how do you sit down and say, now to do something that no one has seen before in this form? It was a lot harder than I expected. I got there, but it was a lot harder. I thought it'd be easy.
That is so interesting because it is, yeah, such an expansive universe at this point across TV shows and books and comics and all these different media. Did you hop back into it to prepare? Did you rewatch any old shows or reread anything? How did you sort of get yourself into the voice and the mindset for the story?
I probably should have. It was all in the vault. I'm pointing
Nice.
at my head here, all in the vault. Yeah, I think it has, Lower Decks especially has the advantage that the main characters, Mariner, Boimler, Rutherford, Tendi, Tillin, and Shax, they all have such distinctive voices. You can absolutely tell a line from Shax from a line from Mariner or Boimler. And so when your characters have these clear voices, it makes it a lot easier to capture them and make sure you're doing it right. So I didn't actually rewatch anything. I just took a couple walks thinking about Star Trek.
That's very impressive to me. And it does sound a little bit like when you're working within the lower deck space, particularly because it is so funny, but also reverent for the material. That story idea generation process can look a lot like it does for comics, where you're like, okay, well, we have these strong personalities. Like, what's going to happen if we put like these two people together? Like, what sort of crazy thing will they do? So,
Yeah. And for we did Shax's best day first, and then Shax's worst day second. And for both of them, but especially for Shax's best day, that was part of an event that was happening in the Star Trek comics at the time. And they kept saying it's a joke, at some point, Shax has to have his best day, just go ham on killing fascist Klingons. Wouldn't that be funny? And they kept repeating it. And finally, like, let's talk to Ryan and see if we can actually make this happen. So I had a brief of like Shax kills Klingons. That was basically it. Shax kills fascist Klingons, and the real appeal for me for that was here's a chance to do a story that has way more action than you normally get in Star Trek, because in comics you have an infinite special effects budget. And you know what? I lied to you earlier because I didn't rewatch any Star Treks, but I did watch some action movies. I wanted to get an idea of how action escalates in a story. And I tried to emulate that, where Shax is doing these incredible, fantastic, fun things, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger throughout the story until, spoiler alert, you're strangling a Klingon on a crashing shuttle as you burn up an atmospheric reentry. And that's just a lot of fun. I remember being so pleased with the idea of, we went with a scene where Shax throws a bat'leth at a bad guy, and the bad guy's like, you missed, but the bat'leth is basically boomerang shaped. If you were really strong, you could throw it like a boomerang and it would come around and cut the person's head off from behind. I was so pleased with that because there's no Star Trek media where bat'leths get used by boomerangs, because it's kind of a ridiculous concept. They're so huge. But in Lower Decks and in the animation style we drew it in, you can make that look believable, have Shax throw something with that strength to make it fly like a boomerang, and B, show someone's head getting cut off by a blade and not have it be gory, have it be a joke, like it reads as action comedy. So a lot of fun.
so it sounds like they approached you with a Shax story. You didn't choose to write about Shax yourself, or is that
Yeah, they came with the snacks. I'd already done a Lower Decks miniseries at that point, where I got to do anything I wanted, and I chose to do holographic Dracula because he's in the public domain. You can do stuff like that. But they had the basic layout of Shax attacking Klingons from the beginning, and that's not a bad idea. Shax is so fun because he has such a clarity of purpose. He is someone who has survived the occupation of Bajor, and he is like, no, we're not doing that again. Not ever.
such strong clarity of vision? And I do love, mild spoiler, I'll cut this if you want me to, but
No,
on
that's fine.
both his best and his worst day both give him like the opportunity to self-actualize, like he turns it around. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is sort of in some ways writing 101, but it took me a long time to figure it out. because I always start with plot. I start with a bunch of things that happen. And I realized if you can have the character go on an emotional journey while the cool stuff happens, it hits that much harder. And so now when I'm thinking of a story, I start with a plot, the bunch of things that happen. That's not yet a story, that's just a sequence of events. And then I have to figure out what makes it a story. Why do you care about this happening to SHAXS? What does SHAXS think about this as it's happening? What's he learning? So it's funny because you were told, I was told that in like elementary school writing classes. And I was like, whatever, I just want to see cool stuff. Because as a kid, you don't see what's happening under the surface, you just see the cool stuff. I like movies where cars explode. So why don't they have exploding cars in every movie? And then you sit down to write the ultimate car exploding story and realize just a bunch of cars exploding isn't it. There has to be more happening than just more cars exploding than you've ever seen before. So I guess what I'm saying is my whole career has been a journey in seeing that my elementary school teachers were right all along, and I should have listened.
They really, had the distilled creative writing advice down to,
Yeah.
purified level for a little kid.
Absolutely. And it was right.
Yeah. So, all right, that's cool. So, in terms of the supporting cast, did you have the freedom to choose who you wanted to include? And, who were your favorites who you were sure to get in there?
So they had this setup of who was on the ship where this fascist Klingon world was. But beyond that, it was open to me, and I very quickly detached myself from what they were doing to just go completely hog wild. So everything there was open book? No, blank page is the expression. I got to met the Klingon people, the Klingon captain, the battle suit that they encounter. All of it was just, you've got these pages, Ryan, and we're not going to say no. So have fun. And I have to credit Mike McMahon, the Lower Decks showrunner, because he's also a huge comics fan. And from the very beginning, we had these phone calls where he was like, I want the comics to be really cool. I don't want them to feel like an afterthought. I want them to feel like they're canon. And I want you to just don't feel restrained by anything. Like, go big. And that's the greatest thing you can hear from someone who has the power to say no. And be like, I'm going to say yes. And so go for it.
So, something that I did love is that you did shout out those other comics within the text of these comics here. You talk about like the wider stories, and you have a fun little footnote about breaking the rules of storytelling and of marketing and all these things. In terms of breaking rules intelligently, because I think every rule broken is really funny here and well done. Were there rules that you had to follow in terms of like, I'm very specifically talking about like Star Trek technobabble, like was the vocabulary you had to use, is there like a set like of jargon for that? Like
There is, but I've internalized it all through decades of watching Star Trek. I mean, that's for me, that's one of the joys of Star Trek is it's called technobabble or treknobabble if you want, but it's not babble. There's an internal consistency to it. And one of the things that's so fun about Star Trek is even when they get it wrong, you can figure out a way that shows it was actually right. And my favorite example of this is there's an episode where there's a Dyson sphere called Relics. And in the climax of that, they're holding the ship in front of basically a closing door to keep the door open so they can beam off of it. But they're using the shields to do that. Normally, you can't beam through shields. That's one of the rules of Star Trek, is shields prevent transporter beams. But if you go deeper, there's an episode where O'Brien mentions a shield recycling technique that leaves a small millisecond window where if you knew it was there, you could beam out of it. So it's not a mistake. It's actually a subtle reference to this shield recycling technique established in an earlier or later episode. And that's the fun of it, is that it's like a puzzle and you've got all the pieces in front of you. So you can just rattle off, we'll reroute the secondary power. We're not. That's it. Pretty much. Good girl. Yeah. So you just rattle off, like, we'll send the backup power to the secondary phase inverters. And to some, that won't mean anything, but to someone who's made a study of technobabble, you're like, oh, well, is that what the secondary phase inverters are normally used for? Like, what are we doing here? So I'll say it's made up and it's imaginary, but it's fun. And I love that it's consistent and not arbitrary. It feels very satisfying to get to have stuff that fits in this established universe of imaginary technology, but it still behaves deterministically and predictably.
Mm, that's so interesting. And I love the phrase Technobabble. I would have used that had I known it because Technobabble is a little derogatory. That's so fun. And it really like there's such a rich history to tap into. You did say you went to grad school, and it feels like it's the perfect material for somebody who like loves research and finding small details and, and
Mhm.
little things like just researching Trek lore. Um, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the team that you worked with, your artist and your letterer.
Yeah, so this was a reunion with Derek Charm, who we did Squirrel Girl together for a couple of years, and we have a great rapport. And what I love about Derek is his style is almost an animated style. Like it looks like it could be a cartoon, and so he can capture that lower decks feeling really, really well, and it makes it as authentic, I think, as it could possibly be to just like watching the show. And lettering is often one of the unsung parts of comics because if you're doing it well, it kind of disappears. I think to comic aficionados, when you see great lettering, it is very visible. It's like, wow, I love what they did there. Look how that emotion comes through. What a choice to put this balloon here and to make these words look like that. But I think most people only notice it when it's falling down. And so it's one of the joys, because I came up through indie comics, Dinosaur Comics, do my own things. One of the joys of working with larger companies where they, have the resources to get a Star Trek license, things like that, is you get to work with people at the top of their game. Like you're working with these great artists, great letters, great colorists, great inkers. Everyone is doing this professionally. And it always feels like I'm getting away with something because I see myself as just a guy, kind of an amateur. I do my little make-em-ups and get to my friends to draw them sometimes. But you're getting back this work that is, you know, top tier. And it's was and still is my favorite part of being a comic writer is I imagine a scene and I write it down. I can see what it's like in my head. And then I get back the work from the other people on the team, and it's better than I imagined. It is uh, always like a magic trick, except magic trick is like putting cakes in front of me. It's like another cake, delightful.
Yeah, the art is there's so much movement. It's so dynamic, and it like recreates the speed of that show too. And I
Mhm.
think that the lettering also achieves that because Lower Decks has this sort of like, 30s screwball comedy like speed to it, and that's
Yeah.
depicted visually. So yeah, it's just like it's so well done and it was such a pleasure to read. And I am so thankful you took the time to talk to us. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. It's my pleasure. I mean, this is not to keep talking, but we can talk a little
Okay.
bit. Um, One of the things I often say when talking about fan fiction, because people often can look down on it, or people will be like, "Oh, I'm not a real writer," or fan fiction. It's not really writing. Like that's not true. It's actually writing in hard mode because when you're writing your own stuff, fully original, no one can tell you you did it wrong. You can say that's what I wanted. You can't. No one can say your person set a character. When you're writing for someone existing characters, you can be objectively wrong. You can write a character poorly, and people will know. So whether it's fan fiction or writing licensed work, which is basically just professional fan fiction, I always see it as writing on hard mode. And I always want to like tell people, do not be ashamed of writing fan fiction. Be proud of it because you are doing harder work than Stephen King writing his own imaginary made up stuff that he made himself. We have rules, and you have targets hit that you can then do or miss.
It's like a writing a sonnet versus free verse almost. Like you have a
Yeah,
structure and rules that you have to sort of exist within in order to succeed at that. That's so interesting. Well, is
yeah.
this something that are you still working in the Star Trek space right now? Do you have more planned for this?
Nothing immediately. We did a book after this interactive comic called Star Trek Lower Decks Warp Your Own Way, which was a ton of fun. Won a Hugo last year. Very exciting.
Nice.
And that was a mountain to climb because you're keeping track of a whole bunch of different stories. Um, and I had to step away from writing Star Trek comic sites. It had too much on my plate. But I'm it was the kind of thing where I said I have to step away, and they were like, "You'll be back," and I was like, "I'll be back." I can't stay away. So nothing yet, but I would not be shocked if something popped up the other room.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'm very excited to read Warp Your Own Way because I also was a huge fan of your Choose Your Own Path Hamlet. That was so much
Yeah,
fun. So that'll be great to do with Star Trek characters.
yeah. I hope you like it. It's a book that I want to talk about spoiling it. It requires you to be an active participant and pay attention to what you read.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I can't
Yeah.
wait to recommend this to our patrons.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for chatting with me. I'm happy to come back. If I write something else good you want to talk about it, I'm happy to come back.
Oh, yes. All right. I'm going to hold you to that. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, listeners, your homework is to check out Star Trek, SHAXS' Best and Worst Day. It is such a good read. And if you love Lower Decks, if you love Star Trek in general, I think it's going to be a really, really fun time for you. Thank you so much for joining us, y'all. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.